The night my parents gave my wedding date to my younger sister, they expected me to cry. My mother had already moved the seating chart aside. My father had prepared a speech about family unity. My sister sat across from me with her hand resting over her new engagement ring, trying not to smile too soon. Then my father said, "Sophie needs the June 15th date more than you do. You can choose another weekend." That date had been mine for 14 months. The venue belonged to my parents. The deposit had come from my savings. The invitations had not gone out yet, but my photographer, florist, caterer, and band were already under contract. My sister had been engaged for 12 days. I looked at all three of them and said, "All right." My mother relaxed immediately. My sister smiled. My father nodded as if I had finally learned how a good daughter should behave. What none of them knew was that 3 weeks earlier, my fiancé and I had purchased another wedding venue. Not rented. Purchased. And by the time my parents understood why I had not fought for their date, nearly every person they wanted to impress had already received an invitation to a wedding they could no longer control. My name is Caroline Brooks. I was 33 years old when this happened, and for most of my life, my younger sister Sophie was the person my family rearranged itself around. Sophie was 3 years younger than me. She was beautiful in the effortless way people always noticed. She entered a room and strangers remembered her. She cried easily, laughed loudly, and had a talent for making ordinary events feel like celebrations built specifically for her. My parents called her sensitive. What they meant was that the rest of us were expected to prevent her disappointment. When Sophie forgot a school project, my mother stayed awake finishing it with her. When she failed a college course, my father blamed the professor. When she changed majors for the third time, they praised her courage for following her heart. I was the dependable daughter. I completed things. I arrived early. I solved problems before anyone knew they existed. That sounds like praise, but in my family, dependability became a reason to give me less. Caroline will understand. Caroline can adjust. Caroline does not need as much help. By the time I was 25, I had learned that being responsible did not earn consideration. It only made people more comfortable disappointing me. I worked as an interior designer for a small architecture firm in Raleigh, North Carolina. That was where I met my fiancé, Daniel Hart. Daniel was a structural engineer. He was calm, observant, and almost impossible to rush. The first thing I noticed about him was that he listened to complete answers. In my family, people usually asked questions while preparing to interrupt. Daniel waited. We dated for 4 years before he proposed. He chose a quiet Sunday morning at the Botanical Gardens, without photographers or hidden relatives. He gave me a simple ring and said, "I do not want a perfect life. I want a life where we keep choosing each other honestly." I said yes before he finished. My parents were happy at first. My mother immediately began discussing flowers. My father offered us the use of Brookfield House, the historic estate he and my mother had purchased with 2 business partners years earlier. Brookfield House sat outside the city on 12 acres. It had white columns, a garden terrace, and an old glass conservatory that looked beautiful in photographs. My parents used it for charity dinners, business events, and occasional weddings. They offered us the venue without the usual rental charge. We would still cover catering, staffing, insurance, and setup. I accepted because Brookfield House had been part of my childhood. I had attended holiday parties there. I had helped my mother plant roses beside the terrace. For once, I thought my parents were giving me something without attaching it to Sophie. Daniel and I chose June 15th. It was the anniversary of the day we first met. My parents approved the date. Their events manager placed it on the master calendar. I signed a written agreement and paid a $20,000 event deposit to cover staffing, security, and restoration fees. The agreement listed me and Daniel as the clients. My parents' business partnership owned the venue, but the date was formally reserved. That detail mattered later. For nearly a year, everything moved smoothly. Daniel and I planned a wedding for 120 guests. Not enormous. Not theatrical. We wanted dinner under the terrace lights and dancing inside the conservatory. My parents participated when it suited them. My mother rejected 3 color palettes before admitting they were not her colors to choose. My father suggested inviting several business associates I had never met. I said no politely. He called me rigid. Sophie showed little interest. At the time, she was dating a man named Liam Parker, who worked in commercial property sales. They had been together for 8 months. Sophie complained constantly that Liam was slow to commit. My mother told her not to pressure him. My father invited him to golf. I stayed out of it. Then Liam proposed. He did it at a rooftop restaurant, with both families watching from behind a partition. Sophie cried before he opened the ring box. My mother cried with her. My father ordered champagne for the entire room. Within 48 hours, Sophie had created 3 wedding inspiration boards and a guest list of nearly 300 people. Within 1 week, my mother was calling me with questions that had nothing to do with my wedding. Did I think Sophie should wear ivory or bright white? Would a live orchestra feel excessive? Could Brookfield House hold a tent large enough for 300 guests? I answered once. Then I stopped answering. The first real warning came during a Sunday lunch at my parents' home. Sophie was scrolling through photographs of Brookfield House. She said the conservatory would look perfect with hanging orchids. I reminded her that Daniel and I were getting married there. She smiled. I know, I'm just thinking, my mother said. There is no harm in looking. Then Sophie mentioned June 15th. She said Liam's grandparents would be visiting from England that month and could not travel later in the year. I looked at her. That is our wedding date. I know, it is just the only weekend that works for everyone important. Daniel placed his fork down quietly. My father said, nothing has been decided. But the fact that they were discussing it meant something had already been decided in their minds. I asked Sophie when she wanted to marry. She said June 15th. Not near it. Not sometime in June. My date. I told her it was unavailable. She laughed and said, it is Mom and Dad's property. It is also under contract. My mother's face tightened. We are family, Caroline. We do not need to speak as if we are strangers negotiating a hotel ballroom. Daniel answered before I did. A contract is useful when family members remember promises differently. The table became quiet. My father did not like Daniel after that. For the next 2 weeks, my parents applied pressure in different ways. My mother called to say Sophie had dreamed of a summer wedding since childhood. My father said Daniel and I were more flexible because our careers were established. Sophie sent photographs of alternative venues and pretended she was helping me. One was a hotel conference room beside an airport. Another was a barn 40 miles outside the city with no air conditioning. I declined every suggestion. Then something unexpected happened. A property Daniel and I had been watching for nearly a year came back onto the market. It was called Alder House. Alder House had once been a small boarding school built in the 1920s. It sat on 5 wooded acres near a river. The main building had brick arches, tall windows, and a neglected courtyard. The previous owner planned to convert it into offices, but financing fell through. Daniel and I had toured it months earlier as a professional curiosity. I saw a wedding venue. He saw a restoration project. We both saw a business opportunity. I had spent years designing restaurants, boutique hotels, and event spaces for other people. Daniel understood old structures. We had talked about opening our own venue someday, but someday is an easy place to hide a serious dream. When Alder House returned to the market at a lower price, Daniel said, we should stop calling this someday. The purchase was not impulsive. We had savings. Daniel had inherited a small investment account from his grandfather. I owned part of the design firm where I worked. We formed a company, obtained financing, and negotiated for the property. The building needed repairs, but the courtyard and first floor could be ready within months. 3 weeks before my parents called the family meeting, Daniel and I closed on Alder House. We told almost no one. Not because we wanted secrecy. because I had learned that my family treated information as an invitation to interfere. Our plan was to continue with Brookfield House and renovate Alder House for future events. Then my parents asked us to dinner. Sophie and Liam were already seated when we arrived. There was no food on the table. Only folders. My mother began with a speech about how fortunate she was to have 2 daughters beginning new chapters. My father said marriage required sacrifice. Sophie stared at her ring. Then my father said, "We have decided to release your June 15th reservation and give the date to Sophie." Daniel asked, "Who is we?" My father frowned. "The owners." I reminded him that 2 of the 4 ownership partners had signed our agreement. He said the family would resolve the paperwork internally. My mother said Sophie's wedding had more complicated travel needs. I asked why those needs mattered more than contracts we had signed 14 months earlier. My mother said, "Because you can handle disappointment better." There it was. The rule of my childhood, spoken without shame. You can handle it. Therefore, we can do it to you. Sophie finally looked at me. "I am not trying to steal anything, I just need that date. You want it." It is the same thing right now. Daniel reached for my hand under the table. I looked at my father. "If we agree, will you return every dollar we paid?" He said, "Of course." "In writing." His expression changed. "Why are you making this so formal?" "Because you are canceling a formal agreement." He said he would have the business manager prepare the refund. My mother leaned forward. "Then you will move the wedding." I thought of Alder House. The courtyard. The river. The keys sitting inside my handbag. I thought of all the years I had spent trying to win fairness from people who benefited from being unfair. Then I said, "All right." Sophie's shoulders relaxed. My mother smiled. My father said, "Thank you for being mature." Daniel and I left before dinner. In the car, he asked whether I was all right. I said no. Then I handed him the Alder House keys. "We are getting married at our own venue." He smiled for the first time that evening. On June 15th. Especially on June 15th. The next morning, our attorney sent Brookfield House a formal notice accepting the cancellation only if the full deposit and documented vendor transfer costs were returned within 10 business days. 2 of my parents' business partners had not known what they were planning. One called me immediately. She apologized and said she had never approved canceling our event. I told her I appreciated that, but I was not returning. Brookfield House refunded our deposit. My parents also had to pay a portion of the vendor costs because their cancellation violated the agreement. They were furious. Not because the amount was unaffordable. Because the written record prevented them from rewriting what had happened. Daniel and I contacted our vendors. The photographer was available at Alder House. The florist loved the courtyard. The caterer needed a larger temporary kitchen, which we arranged. The band agreed to perform in the restored assembly hall. Instead of changing the date, we changed the address. The renovation became intense. We repaired the courtyard drainage. We restored the tall front windows. Daniel supervised structural work. I designed the lighting, furniture, and guest flow. Every week, Alder House looked less abandoned. For the first time in my wedding planning, the work felt like ours. My parents knew we had selected another venue. They did not know we owned it. I told them only that invitations would arrive soon. My mother assumed we had rented a smaller place. Sophie seemed pleased. She began planning her wedding at Brookfield House as if the date had always belonged to her. Then she encountered her first problem. Our florist was not available for 2 large weddings on the same day. Neither was our photographer. The band had already transferred its contract to Alder House. Sophie accused me of taking the best vendors. I reminded her that I had hired them first. My mother asked me to release the photographer. I said no. She said family should not compete. I said I agree, that is why I never asked for Sophie's date. They found other vendors. The complaints continued. Brookfield House could not comfortably seat 300 guests without a tent. The local permit limited amplified music after 10. The conservatory became too warm in June without temporary cooling. Every problem had existed when Sophie demanded the venue. She simply assumed my year of planning would transfer with the date. It did not. 6 weeks before the weddings, our invitations arrived. The front displayed a watercolor of Alder House. Inside were the words, "Caroline Brooks and Daniel Hart invite you to celebrate their marriage and the opening of Alder House, a new gathering place built for weddings, art, and community." At the bottom was the date, June 15th. My mother called within minutes. "What does opening of Alder House mean?" "It means the venue is ours." There was a long silence. "You bought it?" "Yes." "With what money?" "Ours." "Why did you not tell us?" "Because you were busy deciding where I was allowed to marry." She said I had deliberately hidden the purchase to embarrass the family. I told her the purchase happened before they canceled my date. She asked whether I had ever intended to use Brookfield House. "Yes, until you proved the reservation could disappear whenever Sophie wanted something." My father called next. He was less emotional. He asked what Alder House had cost. I told him that was private. He asked whether the building had proper permits. I said our attorney and engineers had handled everything. Then he asked the question beneath every other question. "Are people going to think your venue is better than ours?" I said, "People are going to attend a wedding. They are not judging a competition unless you create one." But my family had always understood love through comparison. Sophie called that evening. She was crying. She said several relatives were more excited about seeing Alder House than attending her wedding at Brookfield. She accused me of turning my wedding into a business launch. I said Alder House was part of our future, just as Brookfield House was part of our parents' business. She said I had planned all of this to punish her. I answered honestly. "I bought Alder House before you took my date. The only thing I changed was deciding not to save you from what you chose." She asked me to move my wedding to Sunday. I almost laughed. "You wanted June 15th because it was the only date that worked for everyone important. That was before I knew you were keeping it. I was always keeping it." She ended the call. The final pressure came 2 weeks before the weddings. My mother invited us to what she called a family reconciliation dinner. Daniel did not want to go. I did. Not because I expected reconciliation. Because I wanted the conversation to end before our wedding day. My parents proposed a combined celebration. One ceremony at Brookfield House in the afternoon. One reception at Alder House in the evening. My father said it would show unity. My mother said guests would not have to choose. Sophie said both couples could share photographs. I asked who would control the schedule. My mother began explaining. I stopped her. "No." She said I had not considered the benefits. "I spent my entire childhood sharing space with whatever Sophie wanted. I am not sharing my wedding because you gave her the date you promised me." Sophie said I was punishing her for being loved. I looked at her. "No, I am refusing to let your happiness require my disappearance." My father told me I would regret dividing the family. Daniel finally spoke. "The division happened when you treated Caroline's commitment as movable and Sophie's preference as permanent." No one answered. We left. On June 15th, I woke before sunrise at Alder House. The courtyard lights were still glowing. The river behind the trees looked silver. For a few minutes, I stood alone beneath the restored archway. I thought I might feel angry. Instead, I felt free. Our ceremony began at 4 in the afternoon. We had 97 guests. Some relatives attended Sophie's ceremony earlier and came to our reception afterward. Others chose one wedding. We did not ask anyone to explain. There were no dramatic entrances. No public confrontation. No speech exposing my family. We simply celebrated in a place Daniel and I had chosen, purchased, and restored together. Before dinner, Daniel raised his glass. He thanked the contractors, vendors, and friends who helped bring Alder House back to life. Then he looked at me and said, "This building taught us something before we ever opened the doors. A strong future is not the place someone gives you. It is the place you build with the person who keeps their word. That was the only reference to what had happened. It was enough. My parents arrived during dinner. They had changed clothes after Sophie's reception. My mother looked around the courtyard without speaking. My father studied the restored brickwork. For the first time, they understood that I had not accepted a smaller replacement. I had created something they could not take away. Sophie did not come. I did not expect her to. Later, I learned that her wedding had been beautiful. The tent looked elegant. The ceremony went smoothly. The world did not collapse because both sisters married on the same day. That mattered. My family had acted as if only one daughter could have something meaningful at a time. They were wrong. The problem had never been the calendar. It was the belief that Sophie's joy required control over mine. Alder House opened to the public 3 months later. Our first paid event was a retirement dinner for a local teacher. Then came a small wedding. Then a fundraiser. Within a year, the venue was profitable. My design firm became one of its partners. Daniel continued his engineering work and managed restoration projects on the property. We did not become overnight millionaires. We became owners of something we had built carefully. That felt better. My relationship with my parents changed. For several months, we spoke rarely. My mother sent long messages about how hurt she felt that I had kept the purchase secret. I answered once. I told her privacy was not betrayal. Canceling my wedding agreement for Sophie was betrayal. My father eventually apologized. Not perfectly. He said they had assumed I would adapt because I always had. I told him that was exactly the problem. Sophie took longer. Almost a year after the wedding, she asked to meet me at Alder House. She walked through the courtyard slowly. Then she said, "I thought you said yes because the date did not matter to you. The date mattered." Then why didn't you fight? Because I finally understood that winning the argument would not make the promise safe. She looked toward the river. She admitted that she had wanted Brookfield House partly because it was mine. If I had chosen it, then it had already been approved, admired, and prepared. Taking my date felt easier than creating her own plan. That honesty hurt. It also gave us somewhere real to begin. I told her forgiveness was possible. Pretending it had been harmless was not. We did not become best friends. But we stopped performing the roles our parents had built for us. She stopped expecting me to adjust automatically. I stopped rescuing her from discomfort. That was progress. Daniel and I still own Alder House. Every June 15th, we close the venue for the evening. We eat dinner in the courtyard and remember the year my family believed they had taken my wedding from me. They did take the venue. They did take the reservation. They took the version of the day they thought they controlled. But they could not take the date. They could not take the marriage. And they could not take the future Daniel, and I had already started building. For years, my parents called me strong whenever they needed me to accept less. I understand strength differently now. Strength is not proving how much disappointment you can survive. Sometimes strength is refusing the role that makes everyone else comfortable. Sometimes it is saying no without shouting. And sometimes it is buying the keys to a different door before the people who keep closing doors on you realize you have stopped waiting outside. So tell me honestly, what would you have done if your parents gave your wedding date to their favorite child? Would you have fought for the original venue? Would you have changed the date? Or would you have walked away and built something they could never take from you? Whatever your answer is, remember this. Being dependable does not make your promises less important. Being strong does not make your disappointment acceptable. And when someone gives away the place they promised you, they may discover too late that you already own somewhere better.